June 4th, 1878. A body is lying at the foot of Tramps Rock, 3 miles outside of Yonkers, New York. 2 bullet wounds, one through the heart, one through the head. No wallet. No identification. No witnesses. The body is well dressed, fine suit, good shoes, the kind of clothes a wealthy man wears to dinner, not the kind a criminal wears to a crime scene. The police had no idea who this man was. But here is the thing that makes this story absolutely wild. When they found out who he was, they realized they had just lost the most dangerous criminal in the entire United States of America. A man who had never been arrested, a man who had never been charged with a single crime, a man who was so good at what he did that the New York City Police Department estimated he was personally responsible for 80% of every single bank robbery committed in America during the previous 9 years. And the craziest part, nobody had any idea. Not the police, not the bankers he was robbing, not the socialites he was having dinner with the night before he robbed their banks. His name was George Leonidas Leslie, and this is how a wealthy, educated architect from Ohio became the greatest bank robber in American history, and how the secret he was keeping got him killed before he could see his greatest heist. Okay, so let me take you back to 1842. George Leslie is born in Cincinnati, Ohio, into a very comfortable family. His father owns a brewery, they have money, they have status. They have everything a family could want in mid-19th century America. George is brilliant from the start. He studies architecture. He graduates at the top of his class at the University of Cincinnati. He opens his own architectural firm straight out of college. He is engaged to a beautiful woman named Sarah Lawrence from a respected Cincinnati family. He is literally living the dream, and then the Civil War breaks out. Now George Leslie is young, healthy, and absolutely eligible to fight for the Union Army. Every man his age in Cincinnati is expected to serve. It is a matter of honor, a matter of community, a matter of what kind of man you are. And George Leslie's father writes a check for $300 and buys his son out of the draft. $300. That is $10,000 in today's money, a perfectly legal transaction. But in Cincinnati in 1861, paying to avoid fighting while your neighbor's sons are dying on battlefields, that is social suicide. His engagement to Sarah Lawrence ends. His reputation in Cincinnati never recovers. People call him a coward. They cross the street to avoid him. And here is where George Leslie makes the decision that changes everything. When his parents both die in 1867, he sells everything. The brewery, the family home, the architectural firm he built himself. He packs everything up, climbs on a train, and leaves Cincinnati forever. He is heading to New York City, and he is not going there to be an architect. Now you have to understand what New York City looked like in 1869 when George Leslie walked off that train. This is the Gilded Age, the most dramatic wealth gap in American history. On one side, the robber barons, the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, sitting on mountains of money in their Fifth Avenue mansions, while literally printing that money through corrupt corporations and fraudulent business deals. On the other side, the streets of Lower Manhattan, overcrowded, dangerous, crawling with gangs, controlled by corrupt politicians and a police force that was essentially just another gang with better uniforms. And right in the middle of all of this is a network of criminals so organized, so sophisticated, and so well connected that they operated almost like a parallel economy. And right at the center of that network is a woman named Frederica Mandelbaum. You need to know about Mom Mandelbaum, because she is the reason George Leslie became who he became. Mom Mandelbaum ran a dry goods store on Clinton Street on the Lower East Side. On the surface, completely legitimate. Behind the surface, she was the most powerful criminal fence in New York City, possibly in the entire country. If you stole something in New York, jewelry, bonds, cash, anything, you brought it to Mom Mandelbaum and she sold it and gave you your cut. She handled an estimated $1 to $5 million in stolen goods between 1862 and 1884. She funded criminal operations. She hired lawyers for her gang members when they got caught. She ran what was essentially a criminal enterprise so well organized that she had politicians, judges, and police captains on her payroll. The New York underworld called her Queen of Thieves. And when George Leslie arrived in New York City, a mutual acquaintance introduced him to Mom Mandelbaum at one of her famous dinner parties. She took one look at this well-dressed, well-spoken, brilliantly educated architect with a polished demeanor and a criminal's heart, and she immediately understood what she had sitting across her dinner table. A weapon she had never had before, a bank robber who could actually think. Here is what made George Leslie completely different from every other bank robber of his era. Every other criminal who wanted to rob a bank in the 1870s did it one of two ways. Either they put a gun in someone's face and demanded the money, or they blew the vault door off with explosives and grabbed whatever they could carry before the police arrived. Both methods were loud. Both methods left evidence everywhere, and both methods almost always ended with someone getting arrested. George Leslie thought all of that was stupid. He was an architect. He understood buildings the way a doctor understands a human body. He could look at a bank and see its skeleton, its structural weak points, its hidden access routes, its mechanical vulnerabilities. His method was not violence. His method was patience and intelligence. Before he robbed any bank, Leslie would first find out who worked there. Then he would become a customer, a depositor, a respected community member. He would open an account, come in regularly, chat with the tellers, shake hands with the manager. He wanted them to see him as a wealthy gentleman, which he genuinely was, not as a threat. While he was doing this, he was studying the building. Every door, every lock, every window, every room. He would then get his hands on the architectural blueprints of the bank building and study them in detail, identifying every weakness the original architect had built into the structure. And then there was the device, the little joker. George Leslie invented this, or more precisely, he perfected a device originally created by a criminal named Max Shinburn and made it dramatically better. The little joker was a small metal disc, thin as a coin, attached to a wire. It was designed to fit perfectly inside the dial mechanism of a combination lock on a bank vault. Here is how it worked. Leslie or one of his men would break into the bank before the robbery, weeks or sometimes months before, and secretly install the little joker behind the face of the vault combination dial. Then they would leave. Everything looked completely undisturbed. Nobody knew the device was there. Then every day, when the bank manager or the cashier opened the vault using the combination, the little joker was recording it. The mechanism of the lock was pressing the combination numbers into the metal disc, leaving marks that, when the disc was later retrieved, revealed the exact combination of the vault. So Leslie would break in a second time, weeks later, retrieve the little joker, read the combination of the marks in the metal, walk back to the vault, and open it like he worked there. No explosions, no violence, no noise, just a man who was smarter than the bank. And Mom Mandelbaum looked at this system and said, "I want to fund everything you are planning to do." Between 1869 and 1878, George Leonidas Leslie ran the most sophisticated bank robbery operation America had ever seen. His first major score, the Ocean National Bank in Manhattan, June of 1869. He and his crew walk away with nearly $800,000. In 1869, that is roughly $22 million today. Nobody is caught. Nobody is charged. The bank has no idea how the vault was opened. Word spreads through the New York underworld. Mom Mandelbaum starts receiving requests from criminal gangs across the country. Can your architect come plan our job? Can he come to Philadelphia, to Boston, to Baltimore? And Leslie goes. For a fee, he will travel anywhere in America, study the target bank, devise the plan, train the crew, and disappear before the job happens. He never touches the stolen money himself. He plans. Other people execute. He becomes what you might call a criminal consultant, a freelance mastermind. The architecture firm he never opened in New York becomes, in a dark and secret way, the most profitable architectural practice in the country. On the surface, completely different story. On the surface, George Leslie is one of New York City's most respected and beloved young gentlemen. He goes to the right parties. He eats at Delmonico's, the finest restaurant in Manhattan, where he is personally acquainted with legendary architect John Roebling, who is building the Brooklyn Bridge. He attends the opera. He is witty and charming and impeccably dressed. Bankers sit next to him at dinner parties. He shakes their hands. And sometimes, just sometimes, the bank they manage is next on his list. In January of 1876, Leslie and his crew hit the Northampton Bank in Northampton, Massachusetts. $1.6 million, $26 million in today's money. The largest bank robbery in American history at that point. Newspapers call it the crime of the century. Police have no suspects. George Leslie is at Delmonico's having dinner. By 1878, the New York City Police Department's own chief of detectives, a man named Thomas Bynes, one of the most famous lawmen in America, estimates that George Leslie has been personally involved in orchestrating over 100 bank robberies across the United States. 100. And he had orchestrated them so cleanly, with so little physical evidence, that not once in 9 years, had he been arrested, charged, or even officially named as a suspect by any police department in the country. The papers called him the king of bank robbers, but they did not know his name. Now let me tell you about the job that George Leslie considered his masterpiece, the Manhattan Savings Institution. Located on Broadway and Bleecker Street in Manhattan, one of the most respected financial institutions in New York City, deposits from some of the wealthiest families in America, securities, cash, jewelry, the contents of hundreds of safety deposit boxes belonging to the New York elite. Leslie identified this bank as his ultimate target as early as 1873. He did not move immediately. He studied. For 2 years he gathered information. He obtained the building blueprints. He became a customer of the bank. He cultivated a relationship with a night watchman named Patrick Shevlin, who worked inside the building, slowly, carefully, turning him into a paid insider. He built a full-scale replica of the bank vault interior in a warehouse in Brooklyn. Not a sketch, not a diagram, an actual physical replica, so his crew could practice the heist over and over in the dark until every movement was automatic. By 1875, he began the active operation. He broke into the bank for the first time, not to steal anything, just to install the little joker behind the vault dial. Then he waited, then he came back and retrieved it. Then he went back and installed it again, this time on the inner vault, which had a second separate combination. He was inside the Manhattan Savings Institution, working on its vault combination locks 3 separate times before the robbery, and nobody inside the bank ever noticed. By March of 1878, he had cracked both the outer and inner vault combinations. He had the complete plan, he had the crew. He had Patrick Shevlin on the inside ready to let them in and provide the final safe combinations. The greatest bank robbery in American history was ready to execute. George Leslie had 3 years invested in this job, and then everything fell apart. Here is where the story gets messy in a very human way. George Leslie was brilliant at planning bank robberies. He was considerably less brilliant at managing his personal life. The gang that worked for him was not a group of gentlemen. These were rough, violent, dangerous men. Shang Draper ran a saloon and had a habit of kidnapping sailors off the docks. Red Leary was 6 feet 4 inches tall and had a hair-trigger temper. Jimmy Hope was a career criminal who had done hard time. These were not the dinner party crowd. And somewhere along the way, George Leslie, the man who had everything planned down to the millimeter, started making terrible personal decisions. He began having affairs with the wives of men in his own gang, specifically with the wife of Shang Draper, the most volatile and dangerous man in his crew. Word got around, as it always does. Meanwhile, the gang was already tense for another reason. Earlier in 1878, a bank robbery in Maine had gone badly wrong. One of the crew had murdered the bank's cashier against Leslie's strict orders. Leslie was furious. The unnecessary killing was sloppy, dangerous, and left evidence that could lead police back to all of them. The gang thought Leslie was going to go to the Pinkerton Detectives, America's most feared private law enforcement agency, and give up their names to save himself. Was he? Nobody knows for certain. What we know is that the tension inside the gang was reaching a breaking point. Leslie was trying to delay the Manhattan Savings Institution robbery. He wanted to execute it with a different crew, one he trusted more, one that had not descended into paranoia and jealousy and threat. And Shang Draper had just found out about his wife. May 29, 1878, George Leslie is having a drink at Murphy's Saloon in Brooklyn. His bodyguard Johnny Walsh is sitting nearby. A note arrives at their table. Leslie reads it, tears it into pieces, tells Walsh to call him a cab. Walsh asks if he should come along. Leslie tells him to stay, says he will be fine on his own. Walsh watches his employer climb into a carriage and disappear into the Brooklyn night. He never sees George Leslie again. The note, historians believe, was from Babe Draper, the wife of Shang Draper, the woman Leslie had been secretly seeing. The note said Shang had found out, that Shang was looking for him, that she wanted Leslie to take her away from the city. She gave him an address to meet her. George Leslie, the man who planned everything, walked directly into the trap. On June 4, 1878, a man's body was found at the foot of Tramps Rock, 3 miles outside of Yonkers. Shot once through the heart, once through the head, well dressed, no wallet. Already decomposing, the police had no idea who he was until Mom Mandelbaum came to the morgue and identified him. George Leonidas Leslie, 35 years old, the king of bank robbers. Dead in a ditch outside Yonkers, murdered almost certainly by the gang he had built, the men he had made rich, the men who could not let him live after what he knew about them. Shang Draper was never charged. Red Leary was never charged. Nobody was ever convicted of the murder of George Leslie. The greatest bank robber in American history was buried in an unmarked grave. Now here is the part of this story that is almost impossible to believe. 4 months after George Leslie was shot dead and dumped in Yonkers, his plan went ahead. On October 27, 1878, Shang Draper assembled what was left of the Leslie gang, took the man's meticulous 3-year plan, and executed it. They used Leslie's replica vault to refresh their training. They used Leslie's blueprints of the building. They used the inside contact Leslie had cultivated for years. The crew broke in before dawn. Handcuffed the janitor, used the combinations Leslie had extracted from the little joker, and walked out of the Manhattan Savings Institution with $2,747,700. $81 million in today's money. The largest bank robbery in American history. The newspapers called it the most sensational criminal event in the history of New York City. But here is what makes it bittersweet and almost tragic. Without George Leslie there to guide them, the crew made critical mistakes. They overlooked sacks of currency sitting right there in the vault. Most of what they took was in non-negotiable securities, paper that was nearly impossible to convert to cash without getting caught. The actual money the gang was able to use from the greatest bank robbery in American history was somewhere around $12,000. Then the inside man, Patrick Shevlin, was approached by Detective Thomas Byans. Shevlin was not a professional criminal. He was a night watchman who had been talked into a terrible decision. Under pressure, he confessed everything, named the entire crew. Within weeks, most of the gang was arrested and convicted. Shang Draper died in prison. Mom Mandelbaum, who had funded and organized the entire criminal empire, fled to Canada before she could be arrested. She died in Hamilton, Ontario in 1894, with a significant portion of her stolen fortune reportedly still hidden somewhere in New York. It was never found. George Leonidas Leslie was 35 years old when he died. In 9 years of active crime, he had orchestrated over 100 bank robberies across the United States. He had stolen the equivalent of $200 million. He had been responsible for 80% of every bank robbery in America during that period, according to the New York City Police Department's own estimates, and he was never arrested. Never charged, never caught. The only reason the police ever knew his name at all was because his own gang shot him twice and left him in the woods. He was a man who understood buildings better than anyone in America, and used that understanding to walk through every wall that was supposed to keep him out. He was a man who sat at dinner with the richest and most powerful people in New York and went home afterward to plan how to take their money. He was a man who could have been anything: an architect, a socialite, a respected member of Gilded Age society. He chose to be a thief, not because he needed the money, not because he was desperate, but because he had been called a coward in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1861. And he spent the next 17 years proving to himself, and to nobody else, because nobody knew, most intelligent, most dangerous man in every room he ever walked into. The greatest bank robber in American history, shot twice in the dark, buried without a name, and the masterpiece he spent 3 years building, executed perfectly by the men who killed him.